Welcome back to Walk With TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial who's eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on international education, global sport, and Black culture. It's been a minute. It's been a long minute, almost an entire year to be exact. I really missed y'all, yo. Like I really, really did. And I'm gonna get to why and how and some of the more details in a second. But we have not had a podcast since December 5th of last year, which again, it was almost 365 when we interviewed Timmy Yoke, who was formerly at the NFL Academy up at Loughborough University, but earned a scholarship and is now a international football athlete at Northwestern University, balling out this year. Shout out Timmy. But I want to take us back to November 11th, 2023, because this day was the last day, last Tuesday, if you will, that I dropped a Tim Talk episode, an episode entitled "This Ain't Normal," which, to be honest, is one of my favorite episodes. Just listen back to it a few hours ago. Pretty dope. Very proud of ourselves, myself, and ourselves in regards to what came from that episode. But on that show, spent about 20 minutes reflecting on a world tour that took me to Paris, London, and Casablanca, France, the UK, and Morocco. For those who are unfamiliar. But after being away for about 3 weeks straight, I came home and got straight back into my routine, as y'all hear in the podcast episode. I got Gold Star, went to Saunders. I do every Sunday when I'm in Cincinnati. Before I finally took a moment and had to realize and recognize that this work that we do, this work that Walk With TFB gets to facilitate, is not normal. Like I was gone for what 19-ish days. Let's come back and go straight into my routine without reflecting or celebrating or patting myself on the back in regards to what just happened. Like it's not normal, but it felt normal because it was purpose work. Like I knew I was supposed to be there. I knew I had to be there. While I was there, it didn't feel like work. Like again, it was purpose, right? And for me, can't speak for y'all, but for me, purpose does not feel like work. Get excited, get scared a lot of the time, but it doesn't feel like laborious in no way, shape, or form. Because while away, I'm in those countries, and I got to see Wembley Stadium, which was supposed to be there because a year later got to attend a game in that same stadium. While away, we were supposed to be at the NCAA women's basketball game in Paris, which was the first college basketball game, men's or women's, regular season to take place in the continent of Europe. We were supposed to present at the CIAA conference in Paris. And as y'all can remember, or yeah, if I don't remember, I'll repost it this week. But that caption was entitled "From Podcasting to Paris." Oh, this is out of a good Tim talk. Might should have turned this episode. And then we were supposed to lead and train social entrepreneurs in Morocco and Casablanca as part of their Global Sport Entrepreneurship Week, which is a phenomenal week. And one that I mentioned on that podcast, that Tim Talk episode, is when I found out that I was also there as a sport diplomat. Nevertheless, as I mentioned before, and will continue to reiterate in any public facing and internal or one-on-one conversation for that matter, but Walk With TFB has been called to this work focused on internationalization, international athlete development, and NIL. And we're doing exactly what God called us to do and God has ordained us to do. I firmly, firmly, firmly believe that. Firmly believe that. I mean, I meant that. 1,000%. I meant that about a year ago. I mean that today. I felt that throughout the last 12 or so, 11 or so months. But in that same episode, I shared with us and told y'all that we would celebrate. And then it's back to work because we're not done yet. There's more work to be done. We saw one mountaintop. It's time to get to the next one. So let's clap it up because purpose is evolving. Take the next step, keep moving. We won't be static in our purpose journey. That's not what purpose is. It's very dynamic. But then what happened? What's happened after I dropped that episode on November 11th, I believe it was. And then y'all didn't hear from me. I heard Timmy in an episode on December 5th, but y'all really didn't hear from me. And that episode dropped 11, sorry, the episode dropped November 21st, not November 11th. But you really didn't hear from me whatsoever. Kind of went ghost in regards to what I chose to do, particularly from this podcast standpoint, because I took a break. I took a break, at least from podcasting. And the reason why I took a break was because of human error. Now, let me explain. Let me explain what I mean by that. Yes, fatigue and burnout are real, especially when trying to publish weekly content on a number of different platforms, right? Whether it be the recording, the editing, the securing the guests, getting on the same time zone, to be honest, making sure they're prepped, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a lot of work. And if you create content on a regular basis, like you know exactly what I'm talking about. I also assumed it would be difficult to remain consistent. During my cross country move to sunny San Diego, to which I know I call Sandy over in California, I'm like, there's no way I can remain consistent, starting a new role, moving across country. I didn't have my setup, et cetera, et cetera. But what really discouraged me, to be honest with y'all, and keep it a buck with y'all, as I promised I would do from the very beginning, was that there was a lack of listener growth and engagement. And this is based off of my own eyes, if you will, like what the numbers were saying, which is human MFing error. Again, let me explain. Let me explain. Beginning of the podcast, and when we started this podcast in 2020, the numbers were at, a certain number. Over time, they remain consistent for the most part. But this last season, I'm like, yo, like, what's going on? Like, people not tapping in, like, they're not listening, they're not sharing. Are they not interested anymore? Like, we kind of, evolved in there were several iterations over the last 4 years. Like, are people just not interested in international stuff? Like, what's happening? Um, and because I wasn't seeing growth, because I wasn't seeing, the impact that I thought should be coming, again, all I statements, should be coming from this podcast. I said, you know what, enough is enough. I want to pivot away from the podcast. And instead, I'm going to focus on public scholarship through another platform, primarily LinkedIn, because I want to influence policy. I want to influence structure. I want to influence systems, at least through my eyes and what I was seeing, like in the physical realm, it was not happening. Which is funny. That's obviously satirical, but because why would I make a decision about a God ordained and protected platform, community, and business based on what humans choose to do? That's goofy. That's super goofy. And reading this back is thinking, what? Like, what are you thinking, bro? Because I was evaluating our success and our impact based on quantitative metrics instead of listening to God's voice. There were several moments over the last 12 months that I'm like, yo, I want to start this podcast again. Or yo, I want to jump back into season 6. Several moments. But I'm like, I'm cool. I'm cool. The numbers weren't there. I don't want to live in San Diego now. I want to spend time podcasting, blah, blah. Just making excuses, to be honest. And as a mom told me back in the day, probably, I don't know, definitely under 10, right? But I live and die. We all live and die by the applause of the crowd. I was evaluating our success based off of what humans were doing or not doing it as it relates to how they were consuming or not consuming our podcast content. And as a result, days went by, months turned over, seasons passed. Yet still during this time, there was amazing grace over Walk with TFB. Because during this time, these are a few things that come to mind. I got to visit the NFL Academy at Loughborough University over in the UK. I'm also got to study abroad in both Rwanda and Senegal, and in those countries, got to visit the NBA Academy in Senegal, and also got to work the Basketball Africa League Championship game in Rwanda. And then most recently, got to attend the NFL London games, which again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier in this podcast, a year ago, I was standing outside Wembley, like, yo, like I gotta get here, gotta get back, gotta get back, gotta get back. Fast forward 365, I'm like, I'm here. I'm inside. Last year I was outside. It was testimony, yo. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. Last year I was outside. This year I'm inside. Like I'm in the arena in Wembley. I'm watching the Jags take on the Patriots. It was the final NFL London game of the 2024 season, which is a testimony within itself of like being outside of a place, or being even next to a place, right? Being in proximity to a place and envisioning like, yo, like I see this happening. I see this happening. I'm going to talk about it happening, which I did on Walk with TFB, at least on our Instagram. And then fast forward a year, right? It's never on my time, it's never on our time, it's God's time. Fast forward a year, I'm not just outside of it. I'm inside, partaking in the experience I talked about and spoken about on a number of different occasions. And through those travels to the UK and Africa, or Europe and Africa for that matter, to be honest, there were still several inclinations to restart the podcast. And I still chose not to because I wasn't ready. Right. I was making excuses, as I said before. I was making excuses. It wasn't my perfect time. Not even the right time wasn't my perfect time. I was waiting on the appropriate moment, the exact moment, to take advantage of, to launch and get back to this place where numbers were where I thought they should be based off the work that we were doing and would continue to do. And I just know that during this time period, especially throughout 2024, God would just been looking down, shaking his head like, yo, like what in the F are you doing, bro? Like I'm telling you exactly what to do. I'm giving you different God winks, right? And telling you like, yo, that inclination on your heart, that's not coincidence, bro. Like, get it done. Like, go, like, follow instructions. But as I know throughout at least my life to this point, when I don't follow instructions, God will put people in your life to just drive home the point that, like, yo, like, it's me. Follow instructions. Do as I say. And just trust that I got you, despite what you see with these numbers or with these feedback or lack thereof. Trust that you're doing exactly, I need you to do exactly what I'm asking you to do because the next door, the next table, the next whatever cannot happen until you hit this lesson right here, right? Until you follow this step right here. And so around this time, I met Dr. Betsy, who was my co-conspirator as part of the Global Respectful Disruption Initiative, GRDI leadership program, which is very dope. Make sure I come out to our presentations on December 13th of this year. But in my initial conversation with Dr. Betsy, I was telling her about my work, and how I wanted to disrupt policy, structures, and systems that affect international college athletes, which again, y'all are familiar with. I mentioned the podcast. I'm like, like the podcast has been cool, but I'm really trying to get into like, this op-ed space, get featured in the Chronicle, which we were, which I actually just forgot about. Right. But like, just I want to do stuff like that because during this time period of not podcasting, we were featured in the Chronicle of Higher Education. We were featured, and if I can find it while on this podcast recording, I'll share with y'all the featured in an article that Dr. Katie and Dr. Simran wrote, focused on international athletes. Here it goes. Doo-doo-doo. 1 second. Focus. Yes, on awful announcing. An article focused on how USA visa laws keep international college athletes in the shadows. And I quote, "It's free labor," end quote. We're featured in that, talking about the influence of the media, but also the EA Sports video game, to which I cannot wait to have an entire conversation about that with someone who wants to talk more about that. But nevertheless, there were moments, right? There were different. Yep, 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 yep. And so still don't want to do this podcast. So I told her I wanted to focus on disrupting policy, structures, and systems. Dr. Betsy then looked at me and said that disruption also looks like storytelling. That disruption also looks like storytelling. And that sounds like, all right, God, I hear you. I see what you're saying now, bro. Like you created this platform with your people. You're trying to do some things outside of, your scope, if you will, at least for right now, recognizing your capacity and what you have the ability to do and time to do right now. You have a gift, and whether it be facilitating conversation, connecting with individuals around the world, building community, et cetera, et cetera. Like, why are you choosing to move away from a gift that I've given you? Choosing a way to move a gift and a platform that I've created, on your behalf and have, again, protected and ordained and have called you to lead on what are you doing? And once she said that disruption also looks like storytelling, I'm like, all right. I said, all right, to myself. And so what I'm here to tell you all today is one, sorry for the wait. Two, thank you for your patience because the Walk With TFB podcast is back and we are eager to tell stories and facilitate conversations focused on the evolving relationship between internationalization and sport, including its impact and outcome for stakeholders in both that local and global community. What do you mean by that, Tim? Yeah, we could talk about NFL London or NFL Europe or NBA Africa all day long, but like, what about the people that live in those areas, right? Like, what about the Rwandans and the Senegalese folks? What about the Londoners and the German folks? Like, what impact, if at all, but we know there's something happening. Does sport have on these communities? So it's not just about internationalization in these organizations, but like the people that are also affected at the nexus, but also the periphery of this relationship. So topics this season that you will hear about will include, but will not be limited to international athlete development. And that might be its own season, to be honest. It will be eventually, and also my dissertation. But nevertheless, sport diplomacy, global marketing, student recruitment and mobility, university partnerships, NIL, and DEI. Simply put, simply put, the Walk with TFB podcast is the internationalization and athletics podcast. The Walk with TFB podcast is the internationalization and athletics podcast. One more time. The Walk with TFB podcast is the internationalization and athletics podcast. Because I said last November 21st, 2023, this ain't normal. It's not normal. And similar to our summit, which I cannot wait to share more updates about sooner than later, we are one of one. We're one of one. Ain't nobody doing this. I know because I've looked. I know because again, God is telling me to like you about 11 months too late, but you're right on time. You got to go through some lessons, learn a little thing about yourself, a lot about yourself, to be honest. See some more things, but you're right on time. The Walk with TFB podcast is the Internationalization Athletics podcast. We are one-on-one, and we will facilitate these conversations focused on not just the relationship, but also its outcomes and implications on the communities, both local and global. We're going to do that. That's my promise. That's my commitment. Hold me accountable because it's going to happen. Simply put. The structure of the podcast will follow a similar format to what we've heard before for those who are returning and for those who are new. That structure is 3 different sections or segments. Number 1, what's your story? So let's learn more about the people that we're interviewing, our community members. Segment 2, the trending topics. So that's going to depend on that person's expertise, lived experience, or quite honestly, just interest. Yeah, that's gonna be dope because the hot topics, they'll especially where we headed right now with this decade of sports in the United States in particular, or North America in particular, it's gotta be good. And then segment 3, right? How can I and our podcast community best support you? Both support them, their work, their organization, etc. Episodes will drop weekly on Tuesdays. Excuse me. The audio will drop at 3 a.m. Pacific time, and then the video on YouTube will drop at 9 a.m. Pacific time. Audio will drop on Spotify podcasts and Apple Podcasts, and then a video will drop on YouTube. Again, that's 3 a.m. for audio and 9 a.m. Pacific for video. I want to keep this short, and I think I'm doing a pretty good job because I'm about to close out. And so what I'll say is, in keeping this very brief, is that if you know someone who would be a great guest for this season and for this podcast, hit our line. Hit our line. Email walkwithtfb@gmail, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok at walkwithtfb. Hit our line so we can get them scheduled ASAP. If you're listening, you're like, yo, like there's something I want to talk about at this nexus of internationalization in sport, yada yada. Hit our line. Y'all know how to reach us. Y'all know how to reach us. Do not be shy. Again, it's a community platform and one that will continue to be a community platform as we continue to elevate and extend our reach, not just here locally, whether it be North America, but also around the world. It's a global podcast. It's the Internationalization Athletics podcast, and it's also a global podcast, recognizing that our audience is in, last time I checked, 46 different countries. I hit 100 this season. It'd be pretty dope. Thank y'all for your continued support. And by support, I mean encouragement, accountability, and inspiration. All the TikToks, all the tweets, all the reels, all the different articles y'all have sent me over the last 12 months in particular. Like, yo, you seen this? Yo, you aware of this? Yo, we need to talk about this. Have been so very needed. I can't wait to bring those sidebar conversations to this podcast platform. So if you send me something over the last 12 months, again, hit me. We can jump on the pod and talk about it. And again, you don't have to be a quote unquote expert. It's not an expert only podcast, right? We're all learning. We're learning in community together. So there's something that you want to talk more about and just, wrap it up about in regards to whatever is happening that intrigues you. Again, hit me. Let's figure this out because those conversations that we're figuring things out together, quite honestly, the most impactful and ones that shape our collective learning journey together. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Walk with TFB. Again, that's Walk, WALK, space WITH, space TFB. That's me. But lock in. Lock in, man. Lock in season 6. Like, this shit about to be legendary. For sure, for sure. Like, There's so much shit I want to talk about. The others that I already know and have tapped, like, yo, like, I need you on this season. There might be a few returning guests, especially as we get this season 6 off the ground, just based on what's happening in their own spheres of influence and, oversight. But I'm hyped. I'm so hyped. In addition to being a founder and podcast host, I'm also a PhD student. So I got to go, right? But nonetheless, man, see y'all next week for season 6, episode 1. As always, until then, walk with me. Peace out.